everything you wanted to know about Romeo and Juliet before we read. So let's just ask the question, why is Shakespeare so difficult to read? Why is it so hard to understand? Obviously, we're dealing with an older style of English, but it's more than that. You have to look at this play and most of Shakespeare's plays like actually a piece of poetry. It has a very specific format that it's following. It's called iambic pentameter, and without getting too technical, an iamb is what's called a poetic foot with certain stresses on syllables. Pentameter would mean there's 5 of these poetic feet in it, with 2 syllables in each. So every single line, almost every single line, has 10 syllables, and you can read it stressed in a certain way. So if you count them, right, let's just look at the first line. 2 households both alike in dignity. 10 right there. And so, in college, when you look at Shakespeare plays, if you're one of those nerdy English majors like yours truly, you would be able to say it like 2 households both alike in dignity. And that's kind of how you would read it with the stressed and unstressed syllables. So you have that. So Shakespeare has this kind of parameter where he's having to do 10 syllables in every line. Now, a couple lines drop down to the next line or might have 1 extra syllable in it, but by and large, it's 10 syllables. So he did a few things to accomplish that. For one, he would shorten words. So instead of it being a 2-syllable word, he would shorten it into 1. Even just on the first page, instead of running away, runst away. So running becomes 1-syllable runst. So he would collapse words into itself, or several words into it, to reduce syllables. He would expand. So if you ever see a little accent mark over the ED, like we'd say beloved, with an accent mark it would be beloved. So you have an extra syllable added. All right. So he would also, if there wasn't a word that he wanted to use, he would make up a word, or he would use what was an adjective as a noun and just do how he wanted to do. He took poetic license. And lastly, he's just a smart man. So some of the vocabulary is difficult if you don't have, the experience and depth of vocabulary that, some people have that are more and more educated. That's just the nature of the play. So you have all of those reasons that make Shakespeare very difficult, especially the first read through. The first reading of a play of Shakespeare, you're lucky that you're going to get what quarter of it, what's being said. If you just sat there and watched a movie for the first time, it would be really tough. Now, I've been reading many of these plays for years and years, so at this point, when you're really familiar with it, everything is really clear to you. You really can understand it. But the first read through can be really tough. So if you're like, I don't get this, don't kick yourself. Don't feel bad about yourself. It's natural. That's just the way it is. This is why we're reading this right now as we jump into this play. It's a tragedy. Basically, if Shakespeare wrote a tragedy, it means by the end, everyone is dead. The comedies, most people are still alive. But the weird thing about Romeo and Juliet is there's actually a lot of comedy in it in the first half of the play. But we know the whole time that it's going to end poorly, simply because it's called The Tragedy of Romeo and Juliet. So those are kind of some of the key things that you need to know before we jump into it. And as we go through the play, we will review and discuss. All right. Hope that clears some stuff up as we jump in.